Hello, MotoAmerica fans. It's time for another episode of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you may even learn something from this unlikely pair and their special guest. The mic is yours, Paul and Sean.
Hello, MotoAmerica fans. This is Paul Carruthers, and this is the weekly MotoAmerica podcast, Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. I'm joined, as always, by Sean Bice, who's out in Ohio. I reside in not-so-sunny California at the moment, and our guest today is Jackson Blackmon. We'll chat with Jackson here in a second, but how are you today, Sean? Post-Daytona Blues?
Yeah, it was great. We're all in Florida together. That was a great few days out there. We were remarking when we were there how it's so weird how we go down there and the events, it starts a day early and ends a day earlier than normal. So we couldn't really figure out what day it ever was, with the 200 being on Saturday and being Sunday, kind of a traveling day. That was a little different for all of us, I guess. So, but it was a good event. Wow, it was a good event. Yeah,
most of us actually had trouble getting home with I know we ran into trouble getting to Atlanta, and they sent us to Columbia, South Carolina, and then we finally got to Atlanta and got home. But it was about 9 hours later than what we were supposed to get home, so it was a little difficult. But no, I enjoyed Daytona. I mean, we had a bit of controversy with the Daytona 200, and how some people perceived what happened versus what actually happened. And I think our guys and girls followed the rule book. I think there's just a lot of people, myself included, who wasn't really up to speed on what those particular rules were. I think we all need to get a little better about that. I know Jason Pridmore and Greg White were a little off base with it. And like I said, I'm as guilty as anybody for not knowing what those rules were. So from the outside looking in, they seemed a little wonky, but like I said, they were following the rules to the T. So I don't know if some of those rules need to be tinkered with or what have you. And then there's the incident there with Josh Herrin and Richie Escalante. And it's funny because it's one of those things, and it's the same with all racing and sports, I guess, in general. But you always tend to look at it from the side. Like if you're a Richie Escalante fan, then you're pissed and you think it's Josh Herrin's fault. And if you're a Josh Herrin fan, then you think everything's okay. And I kind of fall in the middle, because I would have liked to have seen the incident not happen. I would have liked to have seen the race go the full distance with the two guys who by that point had thinned the herd, so that it was just the two of them, and it was going to be a 2-man race to the finish, and we would have seen what, who had what and how it transpired. But we didn't get the opportunity to do that because they came together and Richie crashed. And then a few laps later, obviously we had the red flag and the whole thing started over again anyway. But yeah, it would have been nice if it was a little different. But, in the end, I think other than the incident with Richie, whether you see it as Herrin being right or wrong, I mean, he was the guy that was at the front with Richie. And like I said, it was down to those two. So he is deserving of the victory, more so than maybe a guy who was not even in the lead pack and might have been 10th, but was in the lead pack in the 10-lap restart. So I think it all turned out okay for most people. And there's always going to be people that are upset that it didn't turn out the way that they wanted. But overall, that's kind of my take on it. Obviously, the rest of the races were awesome as well. And it was just... it was a good Daytona week. It was a good way to get our season started. And I think our guest would agree. I mean, Jackson is back from an injury. It was a severe ankle break that he had at Road America last year. And it's been a long struggle for him. So for him to come to Daytona and start a season with a second and a third place finish, so 2 podiums in 2 of the REV'IT Twins Cup races, he's got to be happy. It's, he's second in points. He's 9 behind Gus Rodeo. He's 9 ahead of Hayden Schultz. He's in a really good position leaving Daytona. And Daytona is one of those things. It's like people always say, you can't win the championship there, but you could definitely lose it. And I think it's a nice little boost to leave there with good points and obviously confidence going to Road Atlanta. So that's my take on it. Sean, you got anything to add before we start talking to Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everything like what you said, I think I was as guilty as anybody else of, I have looked at those rules before, but, I certainly can't retain them and don't memorize them. And there are certain things, well, the supplemental rules about Daytona, I mean, that was incredible that of anything that could happen in that 200, it got red flagged on the lap that applied to that rule, where if it's more than 5 laps remaining, which it was, then you have to do a restart, and you can't just restart it with 5 laps. You have to add 5 laps onto it. So it was just one of those weird situations where it was a perfect storm. I mean, Paul Don Emdy was down there, and he's as much of a historian as anybody about the 200 and has written books about it. And he admitted that that's never happened before. There have been a lot of shorter Daytona 200s. There was never one that was that long in terms of laps and in terms of miles, but it was absolutely by the rule book. And then, there were some things in those rules that apply to all of our sprint races. But of course, when you have the rest of our races that are of a shorter duration, our sprint races, instead of, if you want to call the Daytona 200 an endurance race, then, there are things that come into play that don't always, like this issue about lap riders that get back on the lead lap. Well, that happens at every one of our races. That's a rule that is always there. It's just that, generally in our sprint races, you don't have guys that are, 2 and 3 laps down or something and get back in a race. So there's a lot of stuff about it. But like you said, I mean, one thing with MotoAmerica, it's they're receptive. We are receptive to things, and there are rules, and they followed the rules, and the rules were right. Well, I guess you can argue whether the rules are right. That's my point. Our issue is, rules can be changed, and they're certainly going to look at it and try to figure out, well, we followed the rules, but was that the best way to go? And maybe things can change. Everything's always in flux. But it was all written down. It was all accounted for, and it was all done by the rules, which, sometimes following rules aren't always the easiest thing to do. And yet, that's what created some of it. I will say about Richie and about Josh Herrin. I mean, I felt the same way as you did. I root for both those guys, and I root for more than anything for an awesome race. And it seemed like it was going to come down to that for sure. I think it did anyway in the restart, but it was a shame for Richie that he couldn't continue. The interesting thing is that, both those guys are going to be racing this season in the Medallia Superbike Cup. So maybe there's a rivalry brewing there that we will see, as early as Road Atlanta when the Superbikes get underway there. So it's going to be interesting, but yeah, let's get Jackson Blackmon on, because for sure I was very impressed with what he did at Daytona. I mean, he really came out of the blocks and did some amazing things. So let's bring him in. Jackson, it's great to have you on the podcast after such an amazing Daytona for you. Welcome.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Daytona couldn't have gone much better, really. And especially coming back from the ankle injury, it gave me the peace of mind, to know that the ankle wasn't playing a part in my riding, and I was able to have good confidence on the bike.
Jackson, it was funny because, I mean, I don't know, it felt like in talking to you. I mean, I know that you've got a new leathers company this year, and things came together for whatever reason, just in time for Daytona. It seemed to me like it was for me, it felt a little nerve wracking. Like, you were getting your team together, you're getting your bike together, your leathers, your color, your livery, all that stuff. And then it all really did gel just in time for Daytona. Did it feel like you kind of went right to the 11th hour on some things?
Yeah, definitely. So as I'm sure that most around the pack now, but some may not know, is I run my own race team. So Blackmon Racing, which of course sponsored by Track Day Winner, couldn't do it without our title sponsor. But most of the bike work is done from me and my dad and my buddy Giacomo Manera and Brandon Cole. We all put a lot of hours on that bike right up to the race, and even at the racetrack, still sorting through some things and working with our engine builder, Kobe Adams, and our tuner, Lee Shirts at Lee's Performance. And it was really a collaborative effort of everybody putting in a lot of hours and making it happen. And so it just felt so nice to kind of pay back all that hard work to my whole team and my family, you know, to come out and have really the best start of the season I've had in probably the last just about 4 seasons.
All right, I'm going to put you on the stop on the. I'm going to put the hot button in your hand there and ask you a question you're not going to want to answer. But what was your view on the Herrin Escalante incident?
Well, that's a tough one. I feel like I'm just kind of playing a tape recorder over me, you, and Sean's answers on that. But I think where I'd like to leave it is like I would have loved to see the race come down to the end. You know, however that would have played out would have been, I think, a really great race to watch. But it's just unfortunate to see something like that happen right in that kind of awkward race distance where I think they were talking about if it would have gone like a lap or two further, it would have been played out even differently with how they would have handled the situation and everything. For me, it was kind of interesting to see, like, I know they went by the rule book and everything, but some of the penalties I felt like kind of varied in the crime, I guess, maybe. Although I know, like I said, everything was done to the rule book, but it was definitely an interesting race, you know. So I'm curious to see how the rest of the season plays out. Like you said, between those two guys, I know that Richie, you know, didn't look very happy.
No, he actually, which I can't believe. Herrin says he actually flipped him off, which I couldn't imagine Richie doing that, but I guess he did. And why not? I mean, he's obviously put a lot of effort into it and it got taken away there close to the end. But yeah, I don't, that was very politically correct, by the way, Jackson. And Sean and I have kind of been dancing on the same fence. So we're probably all in line with that. But I was, I don't know, I was a little miffed that it doesn't seem to me like that race would come down to turn 1 at Daytona because there's, I don't think it matters if you lead out of turn 1 or not. You're a racer. You would be able to tell me that, and especially at Daytona, I just don't see that. I don't know, maybe the last lap or something, you give that a go. But anyway, let's put that behind us. You qualified 8th last year for Daytona. I just looked this up this morning, and you did a 2-minute 0.663 lap. And then this year you qualified 7th, and you're almost 3 seconds quicker. What's the deal there? I mean, is it something? The bike's gotten a lot better. Was the track different? Tires different? You different?
Honestly, that's kind of a crazy stat there. I do remember last year being a little tough with the weather.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we had some rain.
Some of the rain involved there. But actually, when I looked at some of the trap speeds, I believe that we were within 2 to 3 mile an hour of speeds last year. And so it honestly just seemed like the pace was really hot this year. And last year was my first year at the track. So this year having a little more track knowledge. And one of the bigger changes was actually I swapped this year to K-Tech, and I've swapped from R7 front forks to R1 front forks. And to me, it's been a game changer in the dynamics of the bike and the feedback I'm getting. And so I felt a lot more comfortable out of the gate this year. And it looked like some other guys have found some pace too, like especially Gus came out really strong. Of course, Mesa there riding the twin, he has a ton of experience and was setting good pace throughout the weekend. And then also, you know, like Dominic Doyle, but, you know, kind of hate that he had an unfortunate weekend.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of Stefano, it kind of looks like, you know, Junior Cup racing. You know, it's like a lot of the same people, and it's the same riders, and it's good to see him move up in class and be competitive at the front of that class as well. When you back to last year, things were going pretty well for you prior to getting hurt. I mean, you're off to a decent start. You had 2 4th place finishes and 3 6th place finishes, I believe, going into MotoAmerica. Then you have the crash and your ankle's broken and your season's over. at the point that you crashed and you were getting, help at the track there, did you think it was as bad as it was? Did you think it was going to be worse? Or what was your initial feelings on that when you were laying there and you were, pretty badly hurt?
Man, that was a crazy day for sure. It was just one of those weird crashes. That was in the first practice session at MotoAmerica. Didn't feel like I was riding very hard or over my head, and just got caught out, I think with maybe a little bit of a green track and maybe a little bit of bad luck. But I definitely remember as soon as I went down, it just was unfortunate the way my legs like windmilled I guess would be the best term. And when it smacked the asphalt, my ankle, man, that thing was hurting bad. Like I thought before, maybe when I dislocated my shoulder was like pretty bad pain, like the first time. But that definitely topped it for sure. So I figured something was off. But I had no idea what, because even in the ambulance, they said they didn't see a whole lot of swelling. So they thought at first maybe I did my Achilles tendon. Mm-hmm. And I just remember them pumping me up with a bunch of pain meds to send me off to the hospital. And the first place said it wasn't that bad, may or may not need surgery. And then when I got a second look at it, they said I need to go and get surgery like ASAP, like within 24 hours, because it's so far from my heart. And so it can really mess with the recovery process of getting blood flow. So then I went straight down south and I'm getting 7 screws and a plate. And they actually had to cut off a piece of my my tibula to get to it. And so the recovery process was much longer than I thought it was going to be. I thought I'd be back for the last couple of rounds. And I think even at that point, I was barely walking around with a crutch. So it ended up taking, I think, borderline around like 8 months to be somewhat fully recovered. And my leg's still just a hair smaller than my right leg. But luckily, I was able to gain a lot of range of motion back. Because I guess with that injury, it's common for most people to barely get back to 90 degrees from like their ankle to leg. And I think I'm well past that. So I think one of the biggest things has been just a lot of cycling has been helping blood flow and mobility.
Does it hamper you in any way, Jackson, mobility, or, you said it's shorter, walking, or, is it going to get better even over time from this point?
Yeah, they said that I still have a little bit of swelling that I think they said would take probably about a year from the injury to kind of go away, like for the most part. Like it'll still be a little bit bigger. But it doesn't really bother me too much in day to day. It's more if I'm just standing around. Like, so if I'm constantly moving, it's getting more blood flow. It feels a lot better. But if I'm in the machine shop or something, just kind of standing at the same machine for a while, it'll kind of get tight on me. So it's just kind of a lot of stretching. So I definitely have to be more mindful of it, like from day to day. And I've noticed that, I don't know like the scientifics behind it, but when like a storm's coming in or it's cold, I definitely feel it in my ankle.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things. It's funny. Paul and I get made fun of a little bit because we always talk about the weather. But I was going to say that's something that you hear a lot with people that have injuries, how you can feel issues with weather and things. Somebody will have that with their knee or their ankle. So from what we've been able to gather, it also seems like Sam Lockoff, have you talked to him? Is his injury similar to yours? Because he's having a terrible time trying to get himself back to 100% too. Do you know if it's like what you had?
Yes, I'm actually pretty good buddies with Sam, and ours are somewhat relatable, but I think that where our injuries kind of part ways is, I believe that when he was coming back to riding, there may have been some ligament damage. Don't exactly quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's where it was the last time I talked to him. And so definitely that's a lot longer recovery time and a lot more complicated than just a bone. So I believe he had to get some ligaments repaired. And so I think that's been the big factor of him kind of not being at Daytona, because I know that I saw him at Daytona, but not racing. And so I know that's got to be killing him too, you know.
Looking at it, what you did was the smartest thing, and that's not try to come back. I mean, you're young, you're not leading the freaking MotoGP World Championship. So I think sitting out as much as you did and really working on that with a goal of being at Daytona was, in looking back at it, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. It was killing me to sit out last year, and I've never been out of a season for that long. So it was pretty nerve wracking, like showing up at Daytona, and I hadn't rode my big bike since, it's hard to do the math, but from June all the way till the week of Daytona, I didn't ride till 2 days before we got there. So I was really, just kind of along for the ride, to see how I ended up doing. And I think it was one of the best things I ever did, like you said, was to just let it heal back right, so it's not in my head, and I can just go out and ride and just enjoy racing again. And I feel like that's when you have the best weekends, is you're just able to do what you love to do. And although we were stressing some things with the bike, I think it kind of helped me stay focused and just think about improving every session. Like one of my longtime mentors, Dale Quarterly, had always tried to get in my head that it only matters come race time, and especially, the last few laps. So as long as we're improving myself and the bike all the way through qualifying, it's almost like practice. Like, you don't want to be too far back, but as long as I knew at Daytona too, just as long as we're in the hunt, those first 3 rows, then the race is going to, be a Daytona race. So we were just trying to work on the bike and myself every session. And I think we'll have a better package starting out at Atlanta.
I remember last year, Jackson, when you had kind of not really your mindset on it, but you did have a goal that you wanted to come back for Barber at the end of the season. And obviously that ended up not happening. So, I mean, that was a plan at one point, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was working hard I was going to physical therapy 3 times a week, even to try to prepare for Barber, and especially that's one of my favorite tracks. But when it came down to it, it just really wasn't worth going out, like you said, when I wasn't in the championship and this and that, to go out and ride at 85%. So it was just a much smarter decision to get fully healed up, and thankfully sponsors and everybody understood that as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of things about you at Daytona. I was kidding with you in your garage that I'm colorblind, so I had the darndest time trying to figure out what the colors were on your bike. The gray I think it's gray, is one of the colors. That was the one I had the toughest time with. And from what I understand, you were pretty adamant, or it was your decision on the design scheme of the bike, the colors of the leathers. I had talked to Matthew Miles a little bit, who represents REV'IT Leathers, who is sponsoring you this year. And he and I were talking about how, you were pretty specific about how you wanted your leathers to be. And it impressed me that you had a definite design sense and an idea graphically about how you wanted yourself in that bike to look. Is that true, that you had a definite feeling on how you wanted to come out this year?
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I always get mixed feelings from the paddock on all the pink that I run. And so this year I wanted to change up a little bit, but I feel like that's kind of one of the things that helps distinguish me from the other riders in the paddock, is since I run my own team, it's all up to me on how I want to design it. There's nobody above me to say you can't do this or can't do that. So I try to step into the avenue that other people can't, and I got to give it to Chris Parrish, also another Twins racer that painted my bodywork. We worked a lot with REV'IT on my race suit this year, which turned out incredible. And I just sent the suit design over to Chris Parrish, and just kind of let him do whatever he thought would match good on the bodywork. And it turned out awesome. I loved the kind of two-tone, and it seemed like a lot of other people did as well. And so it helps kind of make me stand out on track. And one other little fun fact, I guess, is some people don't know why I started running the pink originally, but when I was in elementary school, a classmate of mine, her mother got breast cancer. And so one year at the we were at Grand National Finals, we painted the bike all pink and put like Race for the Girls on there, as to kind of support breast cancer. And then my dad loved how easy it was to spot me on the track. And so we just started doing it every year, but that's kind of the beginning of the pink, I guess I'd say.
Wow, Jackson, that is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I never knew that story about the pink either, but that's cool that you race for a cause, did and still do. That's cool. The other thing I noticed about you, are you taller than you were at all?
I think actually, I feel like I've been the same.
Okay.
I know Paul could stick with me on the height game, but
easy.
But, at Daytona especially, I'd say that it's an advantage. I think Gus was the only one that was that weighed less than me. I'm around like 135 right now, and I think when I ran Junior Cup, I was like 130. So I really haven't changed much when it comes to like physical height and weight. But I definitely realize now, it feels weird to say this, but now I'm in my early 20s here. It takes more work to stay at this range.
Well, it's funny. I heard you guys talk, you were talking with Gus on the podium about weight and everything. And I overheard you saying that. And when I dropped you off afterwards, normally Paul brings you guys back, but I ended up doing it that time. And when you jumped off and stood up, it must be the fit of the leathers or something, because they fit you really well, I guess. And it makes you kind of look a little bit taller. So I wasn't sure. But the other thing I want to talk to you about is your bike. So I'm very fascinated with the Twins Cup bikes. I always have been, being it's a tuner class, and there's so much that seems to be able to be done with those bikes. And I know a lot of it seems to be to try to get air to the airbox behind the cylinders on those bikes, obviously, especially if it's a parallel twin like the R7 is. And I talked to Ed Sullivan a little bit, who is the crew chief for Westby Racing and also participated in Twins Cup on an R7. Early in the season, he's got a company that he creates composite, carbon fiber parts and things like that for car racing and all kinds of stuff. And he had a kind of a snorkel out one side of the bike in testing. I think they might have either gone to Homestead or I think it might have been Homestead. And it was a little bit like the last iterations of the old TZ250 two-stroke bike, which did make sense to me because, Ed raced TZs, so he knew how important it was on that bike to get air into the airbox too. So I know they did a lot with it, and they finally evolved it back around to where the air is coming in through that big sort of what looks like an intake on the front of the fairing where the headlight is on the street bike. But looking at your bike, you have this gigantic rectangular hole in the front of the bike, which I didn't see on any of the other R7s. And I know Chris Parrish has done a lot with air management on the bodywork that he creates. You mentioned him earlier, but I hadn't seen anything like what you did. And can you talk about that? Because you guys are a small team. It obviously must have done a good job. And I'm not trying to discount your own riding ability, but you obviously, got some good performance out of that bike too, without giving away any trade secrets. Can you talk about what you did with that bike to have it look like it does and what purpose it's serving?
Yeah, actually, I got to give that one to my dad. My dad actually got a 3D printer last year. And as some of you may know, he runs a CNC machine shop in the backyard, actually. But he's definitely a really smart guy. And he had kind of heard and saw a little bit of what some guys were trying to do with some kind of ram air system on the bikes. And so we just tried to take it one step further and look to see, or I say we, but really him, try to see how we could make it one step better. And so we kind of went to work on it. Actually kind of late. It was probably maybe just a few weeks or maybe just a couple weeks before Daytona, started just printing out parts and it's some of the parts being, it could take 6 hours, 7 hours to print a piece. So we were kind of just throwing shots at it and came down to the wire. But when we got up on the dyno and did a little bit of testing with a leaf blower pointed at the front of the thing and trying whatever just to see, if it was going to work or not. It was still a little bit of a shot in the dark when we put it on the racetrack, and especially the challenge of trying to tune the bike when there's going to be different levels of air than from like when you're on a dyno. So that was one of the biggest struggles. And that we struggled with some throughout the weekend, but the bike seemed to run really good. And my dad has a pretty good system set up now where he's actually going to be looking to sell some kits for the R7 to run the Ram Air system. I think maybe after Atlanta, we'll probably have enough pieces to sell a good few sets of them. So, but yeah, I think my dad really nailed it on that one, and the bike was fast. That's for sure.
See, Jack, you pinpointed something, Jackson, that sorry, Paul, I just want to jump in on this because this is the one thing I love about motorcycle racing or any kind of racing, how it improves the breed. It develops things. And certainly like I mentioned in this Twins Cup class, you guys have some freedom to do quite a bit more. And I see this all the time where you guys are proving concept out on the track with what you can do. And you mentioned, well, you can't simulate being on the high banks with a leaf blower on the dyno. So you have to take some guesses. But the fact that now that you've developed that for your own bike, you're going to pay it forward. And also, it's maybe going to provide a little bit of a source of income there with you guys selling the parts. So, I just love the fact that, this is, you were successful with something and now, some other teams are going to maybe benefit from it. And you guys don't mind doing that to try to raise the level of performance within the series, I guess, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty interesting of like the dynamics of the class, and how even me and my dad in the machine shop are able to compete with, almost factory-like teams, and how even at this level, all the bikes have little pieces that differ theirs from the next guy, and how even after all that up on the banking, it's very minimal speed difference from all the bikes and manufacturers,
All right, Jackson, do you think he would have interrupted me like that if I was taller? No. Hey, speaking of your dad, I enjoyed watching him in victory lane after race one. I mean, he was going crazy and he was just being such a cool dad. I like watching that. He was on the phone with somebody. He's going, he came back from 7 seconds. It was most amazing. He was going nuts, and that's really cool. One question I have is, when you have a weekend like that and you have a lot of success, when you go back to work at the shop, does he go a little easier on you when you've been good on the track, or is it the same?
It's really funny to say that because I think definitely it does make a difference.
Right.
Because I remember weekends where I didn't do so hot, or, I would say that maybe back in Junior Cup, I had a few weekends where my effort level was off of his, and it was almost like he wanted it more.
Right.
And, but now, especially with taking over our own program, it's never, effort's never an issue at this point. We're both putting in 100%, but back in those days, if, he didn't feel like I gave it my all on the track, as soon as he was ready to leave the racetrack, and as soon as we got back home, it was like, we got parts to run. And this time he's like, I was telling him might stay like one more day down in Florida, whatever. He's like, oh yeah, Jackson, that's fine. That's fine. Just when you get back home, we just gotta, get going on some things. And now he's all fired up and back on the race. And I think it kind of reamped his love for the sport, because we were almost at a point where maybe we were looking at going a different route when my ankle was taking so long to heal. I was actually almost looking into car racing or trying to look at some form of backup. But I think that kind of reignited the flame. And as soon as we got home, he's already 3D printing more parts, trying to make the Ram Air better, and calling sponsors and trying to get some other parts ordered and really helping me out, and before I was kind of handling most of the stuff, and now I can kind of already see him going a step further, and before he wasn't planning on coming to Atlanta, and now he's already talking about when we get to Atlanta. So.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. And by the way, that was a good impersonation of him.
That was amazing.
I know. I thought we had him on the podcast instead of you. Tell me let's talk about that race one comeback a little bit. Obviously, you didn't give up, which was a valuable lesson to everybody, and especially at a place like where Daytona, because you can actually make some time with the draft, et cetera, and maybe riding a little harder through the infield and not worrying about the consequences of that. But what was your mindset there when you saw yourself pretty far back? What did you just figure, look, I'm going into attack mode and they'll come back to me? Or did you kind of think that you'd give it a go, but you wouldn't get as far up as you did?
Yeah. To be honest, right when that happened, with the incident there with Dominic, my first thought was, not run over my buddy. And,
right.
So once I got past that part, I was like, yeah, I think these guys are probably gone. But then I just thought, I was like, well, if one of them gets dropped, I think that my bike is pretty quick in a straight line. And it's like, if they stay in a group, it's going to be really hard for me to try to catch up, but there's a chance somebody coming back to me. And we had also just made big changes with the bike. Like I'd mentioned earlier, it's kind of brand new setup for us. So every session we made big jumps with the bike. And so each lap I went, I was like seeing my personal best time, like, right away. Or like right after that crash, I think it kind of lit me up and I was like, well, I'm going to try to chase him down at least. And so I just kept seeing like green in my lap timer, and the bike felt better and better the more I was pushing. And I kind of took a glance back and saw some guys. And so my first goal was to try to break the guys behind. And once I saw I had a bit of a gap, then I kind of saw Hayden dropping off the group some. So that kind of helped me mentally to kind of keep charging. And then sure enough, like a couple laps later, I see Blake falling off and coming back to us. And I was like, well, he probably thinks he's got an easy second, but I think we're catching him fast. And so it made for a really exciting last few laps, because like I said, it's tough at Daytona when you look at the banking and the draft and it's like, these guys are probably gone. And then, just to keep on digging, it felt really rewarding at the end of the race to see those guys coming to me. And especially because they didn't see me coming, in a sense, I could kind of play that waiting game at Daytona and just take the shot where I wanted to, and then line up Blake right at the line. So he didn't even really see it coming,
Besides you, Jackson, one of the other riders that I was really impressed with was Gus Rodeo. He stepped up this year. I know he started out a little bit in Twins Cup last year, but realized it was a little bit more than he wanted to, he bit off a little more than he wanted to chew last year. So he focused on Junior Cup, and it served him well at the end of, towards the end of the year. But for him to do what he did at Daytona too, that was pretty impressive. Did you feel the same way as well for him?
Yeah, definitely. Gus was on a different level than I saw him in the Twins class the previous year. So I definitely know we're going to have to stay on it and pick up the pace a bit, because he kind of did show that he had really strong pace at Daytona. I will say, I guess, a little bit in my defense, we were rushing a bit, getting the bike together, not to take anything away from Gus.
Right.
But I do feel like maybe there's a little bit missing that we should have a better setup, on like the tuning of the bike for Atlanta. But definitely Gus stepped up big time. And it was cool to see, like y'all were saying earlier, the pace all around was, like almost 3 seconds faster than the previous year, which is just crazy. Like it seems like every single year the pace is dropping. And so it seems like everybody's making the bikes better and the guys are riding better. And I think too, I'm sure Gus had something to prove, coming from Junior Cup and moving up. I feel like the Junior Cup is really competitive, and but I feel the same way with twins. And I feel like now I'm at a weird spot. I'm kind of like the older guy in the class in a way, even though I don't really feel it. I feel like I'm still kind of trying really this year to show that I'm ready to make a move into something different next year. But these guys keep coming up and coming with some speed and hunger, and but we're still here and running up at the front and hoping to make a good charge at the championship this year.
Yeah, and I was happy to see not only, like I had mentioned, Ed Sullivan, but you had talked about your painter there at Ghetto Customs, Chris Parrish. I was happy to see him back in the fold, and he's supposed to, he's reinvigorated and ready to go over the entire season. And I want to ask you about the way the season is this year. Obviously, we've got it set up so we've got two Twins Cup races at every round, but you don't race every round of the season. How do you feel about that?
Oh, for me, I love it. Like, especially being a smaller team, it was tough to go to all the rounds and some be single race weekends versus now, like, I love the idea of take a couple rounds off and now we get 2 races every weekend. So it makes the track time like much more valuable for me, at least. And it just kind of works in my favor that 2 or 3 of the tracks we don't go to are some of the farthest ones from home. So like the first 3 rounds, being that I live in South Carolina, they're all within, not quite, but around like 6 hours from home. In Atlanta, even closer, like 3 hours. So it makes the beginning of the season really easy. Then we go out west to Washington, Laguna, then head back home in Pittsburgh and Jersey. So for me, it's great, and luckily with this, me being a smaller effort, Daytona went so well. So it kind of helps cover the next race.
All right, I've only got one more, and then we can wrap and let you get back, because I'm sure your dad's like looking at his watch going, that son of a bitch needs to get back here and do some work. Say that for me in his accent, please.
Jackson, we got to get these parts out. Bright Eyes is calling me up left and right.
Bright Eyes.
That was perfect. Anyway, my last question is, obviously Daytona's kind of like a big dyno, right? So it might not be a good answer or question at this point in time, but is there a lot of difference between the 2 bikes? And I'm talking about the Aprilia and the Yamaha, or is it just like that it has its strong points, you guys have your strong points, and it just obviously comes out to be pretty even?
Yeah, one thing I will say is I definitely noticed the difference in the Aprilias this year, being that they got the rods they wanted. It definitely seemed like they're pushing the motors harder than they were. And I say this because normally the Yamaha, I feel like, had the bottom end on the Aprilia. And then top end was pretty similar. Whereas now I feel like the Aprilia's kind of fixed that little bit of flat spot off the bottom. And anytime that I was behind, like Gloddy or Gus, their bikes looked really strong. And I know that REV'IT obviously has been around for a while now too, so they have a good setup on the bikes. But I think that we actually may be making a few little changes to our bike, try to get a little more range down low. That I think will be pretty valuable at, like, especially Atlanta and Barber. But luckily, I feel like we had a lot of top end speed, and I feel like a lot of that came from the Ram Air. So it'll be definitely really interesting to see how things play out when we get to different racetracks. But it was a really interesting race to look back on and see, Aprilia win one day and Yamaha win the other. So I think MotoAmerica's done a really good job with the dynamics of the class and, kind of what brand is allowed to do or not. But of course, I definitely say they shouldn't give the Aprilia anymore. I'd say it's pretty good right now.
Cut them off.
Cut them off at the rods. But
well, at this point we'll cut you off as well, and you can get back to work. But thanks for joining us, Jackson, and congratulations on a really nice weekend at Daytona. And as for feeling old, Sean could probably back me up on this. I just still think of you as 14-year-old Jackson. So he'll probably stay that way forever. But thanks for joining us. And we'll see you in, 4 or 5 weeks down at Road Atlanta. And Sean, do you have anything you need to say?
Well, I'll say something real quick, but Jackson, when you start feeling old, just remember, I think Paul can say the same thing, but I distinctly remember Chuck Blackmon racing in Twin Sports, and I watched him from the grandstands. So for sure, I've been around long enough that when your dad raced, I watched him too. So I don't remember him talking that way, but anyways, that's pretty good. But yeah, so we're headed into Road Atlanta. We got a few weeks to get ready for that, but it's obviously the debut of the Medallia Superbike Championship, the premier class for us with the Superbike guys. So we're going to get to see Cameron Bobier coming back, and we'll see Josh Herron debuting on a Superbike this year. So it's a lot to see. And of course, if you haven't already gotten MotoAmerica Live Plus for the Daytona 200, and as a subscriber, of course, it continues and you'll have everything else. But for sure, sign up if you haven't now yet, because we've got more classes. We've got 6 races each day at Daytona. And it's going to be all out there, and it's a great track to watch, either in person or on Live Plus. And our commentary is excellent this year. So, cut the cord, like I said, and, consume MotoAmerica Road Racing the way you want to, with a streaming subscription service, and that's MotoAmerica Live Plus. So that's all I got to say on that. Again, thank you, Jackson, for being on with us, and we'll see you next time.
All right, boys, have a good weekend.